You live here out of charity, my husband laughed, raising his glass while his friends smirked around our living room. Someone asked whose name was actually on the deed. He answered too quickly, too confidently, and something about the way he smiled when he said it made me go completely still. My name is Danielle Harper. I'm 36 years old, and I work as a public school librarian. I organize, I catalog, I maintain systems that hold everything together quietly while louder things happen around me. Most people don't notice librarians until they need something. I've spent my professional life being useful and invisible in equal measure, and for a long time, I let my marriage follow the same pattern. I married into a family that measured everything in dollar signs and status symbols. My husband, Greg, came from people who talked about money the way others talk about the weather. Constantly, casually, and always loud enough for the room to hear. I wasn't like that. I grew up believing stability was something you built carefully, not something you announced. I wanted belonging more than luxury. I wanted to build something real with someone who saw me clearly. For the first several years, I handled the things nobody applauded. I made the maintenance calls when the boiler acted up. I read through every document at closing when we bought the house, clause by clause, because Greg said the legal language gave him a headache. I set up automatic mortgage payments from an account I contributed to every single month. I tracked the utility bills, filed the insurance renewals, and organized the home warranty paperwork into labeled folders that nobody ever touched but me. Greg introduced the house as his place at parties. He said it casually, the way people say something they've believed for so long they've stopped examining it. His family treated me like helpful furniture, present, functional, not quite a full member of the household. I wasn't rich or glamorous, but I had something they didn't expect. If you've ever felt invisible in a home you built, I want you to know you're not alone. Subscribe to this channel for stories about people who were overlooked and chose to stand their ground anyway. Have you ever been dismissed despite doing everything right? Drop your story in the comments. And if this resonates with you already, click like or hit hype right now. The party was framed as a casual housewarming, though we had lived there for 4 years. Greg's real motivation was simpler. He wanted an audience. He had recently moved into a senior role at his company, and he wanted his colleagues and friends gathered in what he consistently called my home, so the association would stick in their minds. I spent the afternoon before cleaning, setting out food, arranging the living room the way he liked it. He walked through once, adjusted a single coaster, and told me I'd done a decent job. The evening started pleasantly enough. Greg circulated with a drink in hand, relaxed and expansive, describing the house in detail as though he were a real estate agent showing the place for the first time. He talked about the square footage, the renovations, the neighborhood value. Every sentence had the word "I" in it. I found myself standing at the edge of conversations, smiling at the right moments, playing a role I had never formally agreed to. At one point, I said quietly to a small group that we'd worked together to make the mortgage payments work during a tight period a few years back. Greg laughed and put his arm around my shoulder with the practiced warmth of someone who has done it many times before. "She means she helped with her cute budgeting hobby," he said. The group laughed. I didn't correct him again. One of his friends, a man named Derek, who had strong opinions about everything, looked at me directly and asked if I even paid rent. It was meant to be funny. Everyone treated it that way. Greg handed me an empty glass and said, "Go see if there's more wine in the kitchen, would you?" I walked away from that circle to the sound of continued laughter. From the kitchen doorway, I heard him tell someone that I'd have nowhere to go without him. He said it the way you say something you believe is obviously true, not cruelly, just as a fact. Then someone proposed a toast to the homeowner. Greg raised my glass, the one I'd just been holding, like a prop, like punctuation to a sentence he'd been writing for years. I stood in my own hallway and watched it happen. The weeks that followed that party had a pattern I started to recognize. It began with the bills. Greg restructured a joint utility account into his name only and mentioned it afterward as though it were an administrative convenience. When I asked why I had been removed, he told me I didn't need to worry about adult finances. His tone was the same one he used to explain things to his younger cousins, patient, slightly condescending, not open to discussion. I felt something go quiet inside me.
Not peaceful quiet, the quiet of a decision being made. At a dinner with his extended family 2 weeks later, he introduced me to a cousin's new girlfriend by saying, "This is Danielle. She's the librarian who files books and receipts." Everyone laughed, including the cousin's girlfriend, who didn't know me well enough to understand she was being invited to laugh at someone. One of Greg's college friends said I was lucky to be kept. He meant it as a compliment. That made it worse somehow. Then came the document. Greg placed a few pages on the kitchen counter one evening and said it was a simple update for the property records and that he needed my signature. He explained it quickly and turned back to his phone. When I picked up the pages and began reading, he said, "You don't need to read every line. It's just housekeeping." When I said I'd like to review it before signing, he looked up and said that my hesitation meant I didn't trust him. I set the document down and told him I'd look at it the next day. He took it with him when he left the room. I didn't sleep well that night, but by the time the sun came up, the hurt had settled into something different, something organized, something patient. What they didn't know was that I'd insisted on paper trails for years, every mortgage payment confirmation sitting in a dedicated email folder, every transfer receipt saved to a drive outside our home network, signed copies of the original purchase documents that I had personally requested from the closing company because I had read in a legal workshop hosted at my library that co-owners should always keep independent copies of foundational documents. I had attended that workshop on a Thursday evening while Greg watched a game at a friend's house. I had taken notes. I had also kept the unsigned version of the document he'd tried to rush me through. I photographed every page before he came back for it. I didn't know exactly what I was protecting myself from when I started building these records. I just knew the difference between a paper trail and a promise, and I had learned professionally and personally which one held up under pressure. I had a plan they never saw coming, and I wasn't in a hurry. The lawyer's name was Mr. Osei. He was a quiet, thorough man who had handled the property transaction when we purchased the house, and I had been the one who communicated with him almost exclusively throughout the process. Greg had attended the closing, signed what was placed in front of him, and celebrated afterward. Mr. Osei remembered me as the one who had read every clause, asked clarifying questions about co-ownership language, and requested certified copies of the final deed before we left his office. I called him and explained what had been happening. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Bring what you have." We met on a Tuesday morning and he reviewed my records carefully. He confirmed my legal standing as a co-owner and identified the document Greg had tried to get me to sign as a quiet title attempt that would have restructured sole ownership. He told me to keep everything stored securely and said he would prepare certified copies of the original deed in case they were needed. Meanwhile, Greg was becoming more confident by the week. He began talking about eventually moving to a larger place, something better suited to where he saw himself going professionally. He didn't ask my opinion. He mentioned it in front of friends as though it were already decided, as though the house beneath our feet were simply an asset he was ready to liquidate when the time was right. Then he announced the promotion party, a celebration for his new title to be held at the house, catered, with most of his department invited. He told me about it on a Wednesday evening and suggested I coordinate the food. I said I'd be happy to host. He paused as though he'd expected a different response. My calmness seemed to unsettle him in a way that nothing else had. I prepared carefully, and the folder I prepared had nothing to do with the catering. The house was full and warm and buzzing with the sound of conversation and clinking glasses when Greg stepped to the center of the living room to give his speech. I stood near the entrance, watching him settle into the moment the way he always did, shoulders back, voice easy, fully in his element. He spoke about his career trajectory and his ambitions. He thanked his company for recognizing his potential. He gestured around the room and said with complete ease, "Everything here is mine. I built this life." There was applause. There were raised glasses. His department head nodded appreciatively. I stepped forward and thanked everyone warmly for coming. Then I said I'd like to invite a family friend to clarify something small before the evening continued. Mr. Osei stepped in from the hallway. The room adjusted. People recognized a lawyer's posture before he said a word. Mr. Osei explained briefly that he had been asked to address a legal misunderstanding regarding the property. He produced the certified deed and placed it on the table, clearly legible. Both names, co-owners, with a financial contribution breakdown showing my payments as primary across 3 years. One of Greg's co-workers leaned forward and read it carefully. Another asked quietly why Greg had described the property the way he had. I laid my payment records beside the deed, then I set the photographed document next to those, the one Greg had tried to get me to sign without reading. I explained what it was. Greg's voice came out tight. "This is private." I looked at him steadily. "You made it public the moment you erased me." The room went quiet in a way that parties never do naturally. His department head turned away from him toward the documents on the table. Derek, who had once asked if I paid rent, found something very interesting to examine on the far wall. The credibility Greg had spent years constructing in front of these people came apart inside of 10 minutes, not because I was loud or cruel, but because the truth was simply there, documented, certified, and impossible to argue with. I didn't choose separation quickly or easily. I chose it the way I had always made decisions, carefully, after reviewing everything. I stayed in the house because legally and practically, it was mine as much as his. Greg moved to his brother's place within the week to avoid the ongoing discomfort of facing his colleagues who had been in that room. He told mutual acquaintances the situation was complicated. That was probably the most honest thing he said about it. I repainted the hallway a color I had always liked, but he'd vetoed years back. I moved the bookshelf from the corner he called cluttered into the center of the living room where the light hit it in the morning. Small things, but they felt like reclaiming a language I had forgotten I spoke. Some of his family members reached out with apologies that circled carefully around the specifics of what had happened, acknowledging discomfort without quite naming it. I thanked them briefly and moved on. What I carry forward is this. I didn't need to win loudly. I didn't need to humiliate anyone or perform my anger for an audience. I needed the truth to stand where I had once stood silent, and it did. I didn't need to win. I just needed the truth to stand where I had once stood silent. If you've ever been dismissed by someone who was supposed to see you clearly, or belittled publicly by a partner who called it a joke, this story is for you. Share your experience in the comments. Tell me about the moment you decided enough was enough. Subscribe if you want to be part of a space where contributions that go unseen are finally recognized. Dignity matters more than appearances, and your story is worth telling. Click hype to help the story reach others who need it today. Thank you for listening, for being here, and for being a part of a community that refuses to stay silent.